so Ford, I think now probably leads into the genesis of the GAO report and the other things that the FAA has been dealing with. But pursuant to the FAA Reauthorization Act in 2018, basically the government required the FAA to modernize. So up until now, really up until the FAA deciding to open up and use digital signatures and to allow email filings, there's been really little change in how we have closed transactions over the last 30 years. The FAA's kind of been stuck in the dark ages on that. But this Reauthorization Act basically is a directive where the FAA has to modernize, and they need to modernize, but they have to modernize their systems. And the government actually gave the FAA a deadline to have this modernization and these upgrades in place by October of 2021. I don't think anyone really thinks that that's going to happen. Probably by October of 2021. It doesn't seem like they're that far along, but that is what is required by the Reauthorization Act. And basically the act is requiring that the FAA allow for just almost complete remote access to its databases, to searches that we would normally run out at the FAA Public Documents Room, and to digitalize the process and all documentation submitted to the FAA. I think, a lot of agencies probably already handle documents that way, but more of the digital process, not the filing of actual original documents and copies of large transactional documents. They accept documents digitally now already, but that is the mandate from the government to the FAA, which I think will be a great thing once it's implemented for the industry and for even companies like ours that deal with filing documents and doing closings all the time. Another requirement from the Reauthorization Act, just something I'm not sure people realize or even remember, is that in theory, the FAA is supposed to, as soon as possible, change the regulations that deal with the duration of the certificate of registration for non-commercial general aircraft. So right now you have to re-register your aircraft every 3 years. Pursuant to the Reauthorization Act, they're going to extend that to 7 years, every 7 years for non-commercial general aviation aircraft.
Scott, when you say commercial, so you have a client, one of the members has a client, they financed an airplane and they operate a Part 91 and 135. Does the fact that they operate 135 require them to go every 3 years?
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, we don't really know how and that's exactly the issue. We don't know, and I'm not sure the FAA knows how they're going to define non-commercial general aviation aircraft. We don't know if it's going to be by size. We don't know if it's going to be how they're operated. We don't know Part 135 versus Part 121. We're not really sure how they're going to define that. There is to be rulemaking. I think the FAA may be in the process of doing that now, preparing rulemaking to sort of address those issues. But it'll be interesting to see what the requirements actually are. Okay, so that and Debbie, if there's anything that I've missed, certainly let me know. But that leads us, I think, now to the FAA registry audits. So as part of, in connection with the Reauthorization Act and a lot of the changes that are going on at the FAA, I don't know if these were initiated pursuant to the act, but they're certainly kind of all lumped up together. The FAA has been subject to a couple of ongoing audits. There are two audits by the DOT Office of Inspector General. One audit has already been completed. That was published on May 8th of 2019. And it basically focused on the FAA efficiencies and their computer programs and public access to information. There's a second DOT audit that's, we understand, is still in progress, and they'll be focusing more on security and law enforcement related issues and oversight of U.S. registered aircraft operated internationally. But that has not been issued yet, the second OIG audit. But there's a third audit that was recently issued. The GAO, Government Accountability Office, issued an audit in March of 2020, right, during or before the pandemic really affected us. And it's a very, very substantial review and analysis of the FAA system. And there's a lot of a really good information in the audit about the efficiencies of the FAA, as well as security concerns that they looked at when they conducted the audit. But generally speaking, what we want to focus on today is that the GAO made a series of recommendations at the end of the audit, and some of those could have a substantial impact on how we do transactions and changes to how we register aircraft to deal with the registry now. For instance, the FAA specifically recommends now that, or the GAO specifically recommended that the FAA start collecting and recording more information on the individuals and legal entities that own aircraft. And so they're not just focused on foreign-owned aircraft or aircraft registered under trust, but they're focused on all aircraft. And the recommendation was that, for instance, for any individual or entity that owns 25% or more of an aircraft, they're wanting specific information. They're wanting the name of the person, their date of birth, physical address, driver's license or pilot license information, et cetera. And for entities, they're also wanting some of the same types of information, name, physical address, state of residence, taxpayer identification number, et cetera. So this is not information that we've really ever had to provide to the FAA if you're going to register an aircraft in the name of, Scott McCrary LLC. I just had to provide some basic information about the LLC, but I never really had to provide this type of information to the FAA.
Quick question. So when the GAO has a recommendation, does the FAA thumb their nose at the GAO, or do they go ahead and enact it, or somehow codify it and build it into the regulations?
Right. So I think we'll have to wait and see. From what we have heard from speaking with the registry, just generally, is that, of course, I think they're certainly paying very careful attention to the GAO recommendations and certainly trying to implement those as they upgrade they go through the upgrades that are required by the Reauthorization Act.
Now, just a quick question on, part of the upgrades, earlier you said you could email documents in. Well, in the past, you could have a file stamp and that you knew a flight was valid, but how do you know a flight's valid if you can't get the file stamped? Do you have to keep a copy of some, receipt that the FAA received your email? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, Debbie, what have you seen your clients do on that?
Well, doesn't that go back to if you have emailed it in or you have put it in the mail, that application for registration, a copy of it makes it valid with the report that the FAA issued recently? Is that correct, Scott? Did you go over that? I mean, I know we have everybody who wants file stamped copies saying that it's valid, but in this situation, their report said that as long as you've submitted it to the FAA by mail, courier, or electronically, or put it in the bin, that makes it.
2 o'clock.
What's your thought?
Right. Right. I think it's certainly, you know, that the FAA opinion that was issued certainly certainly addresses the issue of whether or not someone can fly their aircraft. Once ownership changes for any aircraft, once it's no longer owned by the registered owner, then that registration is no longer valid, and you have to fly either on a new certificate of registration or there's a temporary process where you can fly on the duplicate copy of the aircraft registration application for, I think it's 90 days. So for the sole purpose of making a flight, I think that's fine. The emailing in or submitting in, it's possible that parties can make the flight based off of that, but it doesn't perfect the lender's interest or perfect the buyer's interest. And so I think, again, people try to use prospective registrations when they can to mitigate any sort of risk. And then to the extent there is a delay, it's normally only a few hours. And so we normally are getting filing times and things like that back same day. We just try to file earlier, but you still are relying on the actual file stamp copies of the documents, the FAA's file stamping of the document as the element of perfection.
Well, Scott, thank you. Unfortunately, we're sort of running out of time. The GAO subject, I think, could be a topic unto itself for another webinar. And, you know, we hear that they're going to do a new website with an app and all those goodies. We'll see what it looks like, I guess. But there is one last thing that I think is that we do need to probably talk about pretty quickly. And it's something that we at Citi realized about two and a half years ago, is that aircraft can be sanctioned assets like individuals or countries. And we now, before we even do consider proposing a financing on an aircraft, we run our own sanctions check. You know, what's your understanding of that? And is the FAA doing anything to enforce it, or is that, you know, really being handled by the OFAC folks? And would it be good business practice for all our members to run those sanctions checks on aircraft themselves? Is that something you guys can do?
Certainly, I think that, like, I think the FAA does actually check aircraft that are registered with it to make sure they're not on the sanctions list. I'm not sure how they do that, but I do think they do check their registry for that information. And we certainly do, and I think other companies do. We're running clients and aircraft through, there are different programs that you can buy that for searching OFAC and other government regulations. So we're certainly doing that on a regular basis. But once and that's one actually part of the GAO recommendations and the FAA registry upgrades. I think the information that we have to provide the registry in the future will be run through those databases, OFAC databases, FBI databases, things like that will be searched more thoroughly than it ever has been, just simply because the FAA hasn't had the technology in place to do it. So they're certainly going to be checking it more. And I think we as an industry need to make sure, you know, we're all checking the players involved and the aircraft involved to make sure they're not on those sanctioned lists.
Great. Well, thank you.